Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. More details are emerging as Saskatchewan RCMP released a detailed timeline today of the James Smith Cree Nation massacre on September 4th, 2022. APTN's Leanne Sanders has more.
Miles remained on James Smith Cree Nation, and Damien Sanderson and two other adult males went to the Canistino bar. While at the bar, Damien told an adult female acquaintance that he and Miles, quote, have a mission to do, and that, quote, people would hear all about it in the next few hours.
Superintendent Josh Graham of the Saskatchewan Major Crimes Unit led the press conference today. Using a detailed timeline, he laid out how the tragedy that killed 11 people and wounded another 18 played out. It started days earlier when Miles Sanderson came to James Smith Cree Nation to sell cocaine. He and his brother drank and assaulted numerous people, but police were not called. Graham says Damien Sanderson was the first victim of his brother, and it was determined he died September 4th. James Smith Cree Nation Chief Wally Burns issued an emailed statement saying the September events turned their lives upside down. It's time we start looking at the real truth of our own actions. And after much contemplation about the event, I know we need to develop our own police force. I'm not stopping until we get boots on the ground. We asked for 3 officers, and I'm still waiting for them. 2 coroner's inquests are planned for early next year, and the Serious Incident Response Team and Saskatoon Police Service investigations continue. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
RCMP's Saskatchewan's Assistant Commissioner Rhonda Blackmore said James Smith Cree Nation case is the largest mass casualty event in Saskatchewan history, and that the investigation is the province's most complex investigation. She said drug trafficking must be addressed to prevent future incidents. Well, as we've been reporting all week, drug overdoses and addiction issues are impacting many communities across the country. And that's the topic of today's Truth in Politics panel. Joining us from Regina, Eagle Feather News editor Carrie Benjo and Winnipeg Free Press columnist Negon Sinclair, who's currently in Toronto. Carrie, Negon, thanks so much for being with us as usual. Carrie, let's start with you. You know, addiction seems to be an issue right across the country. What do you think is behind some of this?
That's a really big question. That addiction comes from so many different elements. To say like one particular factor is causing addiction is really something that if we knew that, then there wouldn't be addictions, right? Mm-hmm. It's so multifaceted that we don't have a single answer. Therefore, we don't have a reason or any mechanism in place right now that can fix the situation we're in. But right now, it's spiraling. We see it right now. In Regina alone, we've had 55 deaths in January, wow. Suspected overdoses, confirmed or suspected. It's continually rising. So CBC released this really great portrait of addictions, the face of addictions. 1,200 deaths since 2020. That's in Saskatchewan alone. That's not telling how much is in all the other provinces, but yeah, I don't think there is really an answer as to a cause of addictions.
Negon, a First Nation in northern Manitoba recently tried going dry for a while. Didn't seem to stop the flow of drugs and alcohol. People found other ways to get their fix. Are band council resolutions banning alcohol and drugs the way to go?
Well, it's impossible to make one general blanket statement for everyone. The problem really is that when you ban alcohol, then bootlegging increases, meaning people run their own businesses out of their garage and house and so on. The real challenge is mental health. And, when people use alcohol or drugs, what they're doing is they're coping with trauma. And so that's where the core of the issue is. And so the issue is supporting mental health. And we know that every report under the sun indicates that First Nations are one of the most chronically under-resourced when it comes to mental health supports. Most First Nations don't have mental health providers, therapy, and so on. And so the real challenge is that how do we rebuild ceremonies? How do we rebuild what is our traditional institutions to be able to support people? Because it is a fact that when you have strong language programs, cultural programs, elder programs, it cures suicide epidemics, cures addiction. When people are on the land, then they don't feel the need to escape from trauma because the land takes care of us. And so that's really the challenge. The challenge is mental health. And while band council resolutions are important, and certainly I've seen some of them work, the fact is that we need to rebuild our cultural institutions, and that's where our funding and supports from our First Nations governments should be going into.
Carrie, what do you think some of the solutions could be out there for cities like Vancouver, Regina, Winnipeg?
I was just reading an article the other day of a person. He was at a safe injection site, and he said, "My last overdose was in stall 9." And he said, these safe sites aren't promoting drug use, but rather providing a place where people like him can be safe while they're going through their trauma. Obviously, he was able to recover. Addicts do recover. There's, like Nigan said, a lot of this is linked to mental health addiction or mental health wellness. And I think once people find a way to find that way out of there is hope. I have a friend who spent years combing the streets of Regina here, picking up her son, feeding him, knowing that he was killing himself, but she kept doing it continually. And this year, he put himself into a drug treatment center, and he's doing well, and it's great to watch him come out of it and to know where he was. There is hope. There is a lot of people are just doing it on their own, but like Nigan said, if we had centers where people can go, they can go to access ceremonies and have that connection, have something where they can fulfill themselves and find something. People are obviously searching for something.
Nigan, just quickly, there's obviously a lack of treatment center beds, and in this province, Manitoba, there's a real push against having safe injection sites. So, why do you think that there's such pushback on having places like this?
Yeah, one time famously, former Premier Brian Pallister threw a report of safe injection sites which showed very big success in places like Thunder Bay. And when people had offered that to him, he threw the report on the floor. Safe injection sites work. Thunder Bay has proven it. Vancouver's proven it. Cities across the country have proven it. There is a small mobile safe injection site here in Winnipeg that is able to support people to be able to use safely, so that if they overdose, then they're in a safe setting. They also have access to counselors and people who can help them to get off addiction. The fact is, safe injection sites not only work for people, but they also provide support for taxpayers. I mean, when in Thunder Bay, for example, when the safe injection site was installed, crime went down 20% throughout the city, and particularly city services like paramedics, like police officers, like the justice system all saw less use of the system for what is ultimately a mental health issue.
Carrie and Nigan, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate both of your time, as always.
Miigwech, thank you.
A large fire on the Mosquito Grizzly Bear Head Lean Man First Nation in Saskatchewan has displaced 8 families. The blaze is drawing the attention to a desperate need for fire trucks on First Nations. A 30-unit building burned down earlier this week, thankfully with no casualties. Chief Tanya Aguilar-Antiman says the community will rebuild and make sure the families have temporary homes soon. She says they've called in the Red Cross. The First Nation does not have a fire hall or a fire truck or proper training for volunteer firefighters or an agreement with the nearby municipality of Battleford. But the city's fire department came to fight the flames along with Red Pheasant First Nation and the community of Cochin. Aguilar-Antiman says they've been trying to get help for years.
Immediately, the day of the fire, 7 p.m., we had a meeting with Indigenous Services Canada. We had a meeting with the Federation of Sovereign Nations and Battleford's agency tribal chiefs to push this very topic. Like we didn't even have proper PPE. We had, you know, our volunteer firefighters with running shoes.
A $600,000 donation made to an Indigenous-led safe space in Winnipeg will help vulnerable people access trauma-informed healthcare services. Velma's House in Winnipeg's is Winnipeg's first and only 24/7 safe space. It provides services for women and gender-diverse people experiencing violence, exploitation, or homelessness. They got a $600,000 donation from TD Bank Group, which will be spread across 3 years to support those in need of a safe and stable living situation. Velma's House is run by Indigenous organization Ganaganijik. Their executive director, Dodie Jordan, says the money will save lives.
We know that a large percentage of the Indigenous community doesn't access health services the way in which we need them to and should. There's a fear, there's stigma, there's racism that happens in the health system, and so people will just stay unwell. We've had people that have infections, bad infections, who will say, I'll rather die than go to the hospital to have those infections looked at. So our goal and part of this money is to help those services be right here in Velma's House so people can access them while they're here.
The United Nations is being asked to give the St. Lawrence River a special designation. That story and much more still to come. Welcome back. Mi'kmaq fishing rights were the topic of discussion at a Senate committee meeting in Ottawa on Thursday morning. The Fisheries and Oceans Committee is discussing the government's response to a new Senate report called Peace on the Water. One of the witnesses before the committee was Nata-Wanaheg First Nation Chief George Ganesh. He said Fisheries and Oceans is the wrong department to handle First Nations fishing rights, and they should be moved to Crown Indigenous Relations.
To move the responsibility for this from DFO to CERNAC. That is where we have our government nation-to-nation discussions in regards to treaty, in regards to, and DFO is not that body. And as long as they are in charge of this, it's going to be it's not going to get that level of attention.
It may not be human per se, but there's no denying that the St. Lawrence River is alive. For generations, it sustained Indigenous populations along its 1,200-kilometer coastline. They now want the UN support, requesting additional legal protection for the river. Here's Lindsay Richardson with more.
The St. Lawrence River, a nearly 1,200-kilometer watershed, a hub for biodiversity, both above and below its surface, used as a place for work and for play.
We're a river people, we're not, our rights don't end at the shoreline.
A cornerstone in the history of North America, connecting the Atlantic Ocean in the east to the Great Lakes to the southwest. It crosses the ancestral territory of at least 4 nations, including the Innu and the Mohawk, who were cut off from the river with the construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Our experience with the government is they do the research, they do all the studies, and they make a decision, say this is what's going to happen, and then they inform us.
In 2023, Indigenous leaders have had enough. That's why a group of Indigenous leaders from Quebec stood up at the United Nations in New York City late last week, petitioning to recognize the St. Lawrence River's legal personhood, to protect it from development, and grant it the same legal rights as a human being.
Le fleuve Saint-Laurent abrite et soutient une riche diversité d'écosystèmes, dont plusieurs espèces menacées, et remplit diverses fonctions écologiques essentielles à leur survie. Il fait face à de multiples menaces imminentes qui mettent en péril l'existence même et le mode de vie de ceux qui en dépendent pour leur bien-être.
It may sound out of reach, but it's happened before. Back in February 2021, the High Courts upheld legal personhood for the Magpie River in Quebec's Côte-Nord, the first river in Canada to receive such protection. It was the Inuit who petitioned for it at the time, and they were on hand at the UN to throw their weight behind the most recent request to protect the St. Lawrence.
Nous, les Inuits, avons toujours protégé la nature et surtout les rivières qui représentent les veines de la terre. Ils doivent maintenir leur mission telle que dessinée par le Créateur. Nous serons les gardiens de nos rivières et de la nature.
Their resolution was adopted unanimously by members of the UN, but hasn't technically made its way through the courts yet. Meantime, the AFNQL considers this an official assertion of their right to be key players in all political, legislative, and legal decisions affecting the present and future of the St. Lawrence. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
To the West Coast now, and more remote First Nations may move toward clean energy in BC. The provincial government announced new funding for an initiative that cuts down on the use of diesel. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
The BC government is providing $30 million of funding for the Community Energy Diesel Reduction, or CEDAR. The program was launched last year to help remote communities transition from diesel to renewable energy. Coast Funds are our partner on CEDAR, and their CEO, Eddie Adra, is excited for communities.
It's really exciting to see the province essentially double its contribution to the program, and really it's going to help us. It's going to help us deliver funds to the nations and to communities across British Columbia to develop their own energy plans and invest in sustainable energy projects that meet their own local needs.
44 remote communities in BC currently use diesel. They are eligible for funding. CEDAR is administered by nonprofit New Relationship Trust. Since last year, they've worked with 12 First Nations, transitioning to cleaner and more efficient energy options. Sarah Powell of New Relationship Trust says the program has many benefits, including reducing greenhouse gases.
The main benefits of transitioning away from diesel is the reduction of the GHG emissions. Obviously, that's a big one. It is also another portion that people may not think about is it also reduces the transport of fossil fuels. Many of these communities rely on having diesel or propane trucked into their community, or in terms of coastal communities, they get shipped there, which also runs the risk of spills, as well as the additional fossil fuels that are burned through transport.
Kitasoo and Gitga'at First Nations are upgrading or moving to hydropower systems. Coast Fund says the transition to a more reliable energy grid will allow communities to improve their economic health.
But having consistent, strong electrification infrastructure in communities supports bringing further economic development within your communities, decreasing brownouts, and allowing people to come back to their own communities.
According to New Relationship Trust, the program has 6 years of funding, with the nations leading their energy transition programs. They believe the nations will complete the projects on time.
The timeline is mostly set by communities. Different projects have different timelines. For an example, the creation of a community energy plan is going to be a lot shorter than building an entire hydroelectric dam. But yes, so far all the communities we funded, their projects will be completed by the time the program is done. Some will be completed by the end of this summer, and some have a kind of more further in the future date, like 2026, for example, is one project.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
A new episode of Nation to Nation is coming up right after tonight's newscast. We've got a preview of that and more after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. This is a look at an early morning between Driftpile and High Prairie, Alberta. April Isidore had to stop and get a photo while taking her grandchildren to school. If you have a great photo, share it with us by sending that photo to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, 15 for Halifax, 1 degree warmer in Fredericton. 10 with showers in Kuujjuaq, cloudy and 1 above for Nain. Sunny and 17 in Montreal, showers and 15 for Val-d'Or. 13 with rain in Sault Ste. Marie, rain and 16 in North Bay. 8 and possibility of snow in Thunder Bay and Sioux Lookout. 9 in God's Lake and Norway House, 10 with rain in the Paw. 13 in Winnipeg, rain and 13 for Dauphin. 17 in Regina, 19 and cloudy in Saskatoon. Rain and 17 for Meadow Lake, showers and 13 for La Ronge. In northern Alberta, 15 in High Level, 16 for Grand Prairie. 17 with rain in Edmonton, 21 in Lethbridge. 19 in Victoria, 26 with showers in Kamloops. 18 in Prince George and Smithers. +2 and cloudy for Old Crow, 7 in Whitehorse. 12 and sunny in Yellowknife, 15 in Fort Simpson. -2 with snow in Sax Harbor, 1 below in Paulatuck. -3 with snow for Chesterfield, Arviette, and Cambridge Bay. -5 in Resolute, 3 below with snow in Igloolik. Okay, over to Ottawa now, where Nation to Nation host Annette Francis is standing by with a look at what's on deck.
Coming up after the news, baby eels, known as alvers, are making some waves in Nova Scotia. Catching them can mean big bucks, but the Department of Fisheries and Oceans placed a moratorium on harvesting them, and it's causing controversy between First Nations and non-Indigenous harvesters. I speak to a treaty rights advocate about the issue. I also speak to the lawyer leading a historic case for 10 First Nations located around the mineral-rich Ring of Fire region in Northern Ontario. The $95 billion lawsuit was launched this week. She'll explain why that's happening. Stick around. That's just in a few more minutes.
Thanks, Annette. Looks good as always. Looking forward to that Ring of Fire talk. You can catch Nation to Nation right here, right away, as that's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can find much more, though, over on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Looking forward to the Jets, or the Leafs, heading to the second round. Since the first time since I was in college, and I suppose we'll say, go Jets, go too. Have a great night.